their families and their loved ones. The title of the lecture is, as you might all see, Future Development of Relationship between Bulgaria and Turkey. In order to maybe better understand the future developments or the prospects of a better future, I will ask for your patience about my dwelling through some main lines of the Turkish foreign policy, especially with a view to the Balkans, and some various dimensions of our cordial relations with Bulgaria. Distinguished guests, we live in an era of interdependence in all spheres of our lives. Economy comes first, of course, but security, social issues, ecology closely follow. The fast pace of globalization of the last 2 decades has transformed our world into such an integrated place that now we cannot assess our national interests in isolation from the collective interest of international community. Take the current economic crisis, for instance. It started out as a financial meltdown, but it quickly spread to the real economy and turned into a crisis that no country in the world could remain immune to. Yet, on the global political scenery, there continue to be too many countries and regions around the world that are subject to political instability, threatening global security and stability. On the security front, we increasingly come to realize that it's not only asymmetric and non-conventional risks that define the current international security landscape. Conflicts in conventional sense do still happen, particularly in regions where tensions were frozen in the past and they tend to spread to and involve, if not contain immediately, actors from outside the region. The vast majority of the international problems affecting world peace and security are taking place in Turkey's, in other words, Bulgaria's vicinity. Furthermore, we are witnessing important tensions and transformations in our region and beyond. This is not only a challenge, but it also brings new opportunities. As a country that is situated at the confluence of strategic basins and cultures, Turkey aims to inspire confidence in its region by way of mobilizing its political, economic, and human resources. To give you a summary of the general outlook of the Turkish foreign policy, I wish to touch upon some principles which are currently shaping our policies. The first one is to strike a balance between freedom and security. If security is good for one nation, for one country, for an individual, it is so for others as well. We should not maintain security to the detriment of freedoms and vice versa. Thus, we need to find an appropriate balance between them. The second principle envisages the integration of Turkey with countries in its vicinity in order to implement more effectively wider, far-reaching policies. Our goal is to achieve maximum cooperation with all of our neighbors. Despite the recent developments in the Middle East, we still keep the vision of improving our relations with our neighbors. The high volatility and instability of our region does not change our commitment. We work with determination to contribute to the peace and stability around us. The third one is to conduct an effective diplomacy through neighboring regions. To that end, we are acting on the maxims of security for all, political dialogue, economic interdependence, as well as cultural harmony and mutual respect. In recent years, my country has become an active member of the international community. We have enhanced our partnerships with the emerging powers of Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America. Turkey is present economically and politically in all parts of the world. Thereby, it has to deal with a wide range of issues. The fourth principle is the complementarity with global actors. I can cite here the European Union, the United States, and the Russian Federation among them. The fifth principle is the effective use of international fora and new initiatives in order to galvanize action towards tackling common challenges. Our growing contributions to international organizations such as the United Nations, NATO, Council of Europe, OSCE, and the newly established relations with many other organizations like African Union, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, have to be evaluated from this perspective. In a sense, our approach aims to end disputes and increase stability in the region by innovative mechanisms and channels to resolve conflicts, by encouraging positive changes and by building cross-cultural bridges of dialogue and understanding. To sum up, maybe I may indicate that our foreign policy has three main characteristics. It's region-oriented, not crisis-oriented. It's proactive rather than reactive, and it's integrated and systematic beyond a single axis. So where do the Balkans sit within this outlook of Turkish foreign policy? The Balkans is a priority for Turkey. It's not only so from the political, economic, or geographical perspective, but also due to its historical, cultural, and human ties with the region. The Balkans, being the geographical connection of Turkey with the rest of Europe, bears great importance with the special place it had in the historical process that shaped the Turkish identity and the future potential it carries within the context of regional integration and the EU accession objective which we share with all countries of the region. So our policy on the Balkans is based on four main pillars. The first one is improving the security environment in which we all live. We want security and safety for all our regional countries and for all ethnic and religious groups without making any discrimination. This is conceptualized by the terms of regional ownership and inclusiveness. Our starting premise is that this region belongs to the local peoples who have lived there for centuries and will continue to live in this region. All ethnic, sectarian, and linguistic groups are an integral part of the region and will remain so in the years ahead. The nations of the Balkan region are not only neighbors living side by side, but they also form one family with dense societal and cultural ties that bind them. Regional ownership and inclusiveness does not mean that there will never be again any disagreements, but a family approach essentially requires that the countries of the region should manage crises with the spirit of a family. What we need to develop are more regional initiatives to strengthen cooperation and develop ways and means to resolve problems. In this sense, we could call the trilateral mechanism between Turkey, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Serbia as a historic step. Nobody could even have imagined in the 1990s, for example, that Turkey and Serbia would be working together now. The initiation of such bilateral, trilateral, or other multilateral processes would pave the way for wider regional initiatives which could be the leading focus of the Southeast Europe Cooperation Process Forum. Secondly, we have to resort to political dialogue and diplomacy rather than the use of force in conflict resolution. As an important tool, we encourage high-level visits and exchange of views. The 20th century was a century of division. Policymakers should have the determination to turn the 21st century into a century of reintegration in the Balkan region. Instead of micro-level division, we need to bolster macro-level integration. On this point, having political dialogue is of crucial importance. There should be bilateral and multilateral high-level political dialogue mechanisms that meet on a regular basis. Thirdly, we need to create an economic interdependence among regional countries and encourage maximum integration. That means more trade, that means more investment, that means more financial transactions, more trade routes, and more energy pipelines. Last but definitely not the least, we must spare no effort to preserve the multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-religious social fabric of the countries located in the Balkans with a view to ensuring harmony and peaceful coexistence. Despite the bitter experience of 90s, multiculturalism as experienced and practiced in the Balkans over the centuries is authentic in the sense that it reflects the diversity of the region. It's not only a recent byproduct of the imperative conditions triggered by migrations. Balkan multiculturalism is mainly a culmination of the authentic historical experience that has accumulated over centuries. The multiculturalism in Paris, in London, maybe in Berlin, is the result of migration, which has hence resulted in reactionary and, to a certain extent, of course, defensive opposition by some. The Balkan region reflects many valuable practical lessons and has a great potential to contribute to the shaping of the European cultural sphere. When I come to bilateral relations between Turkey and Bulgaria, I have to mention first that these relations are deep-rooted historical relations. With the transition of Bulgaria into democracy and free market economy, bilateral relations have made comprehensive progress in every field and context at all levels have increased. The legal framework required for improving bilateral economic and commercial relations has been completed. Our relations in the political, economic, and cultural spheres have remarkably deepened and expanded. At present, we enjoy good neighborly relations with Bulgaria. Turkey would like to sustain and enhance its cooperation with Bulgaria based on sovereign equality and mutual interest. This is the basis of our approach to Bulgaria. Thanks to the efforts spared by both sides, our relations have become more important. High-level visits between the two countries are exchanged on a regular basis. And there are certain cooperation mechanisms present and working. Along with strong bilateral relations, these two countries intensively cooperate in the regional and international fora, including the Black Sea Economic Cooperation, Southeast Europe Cooperation Process, NATO, and the United Nations. Turkey and Bulgaria share a common vision to strengthen cooperation among the countries of the region through such significant regional platforms in order to enhance peace, stability, and prosperity. In the framework of this common vision, Turkey supports the full integration of the countries of the region to the Euro-Atlantic structures. With this understanding, Turkey supported the membership of Bulgaria to NATO, in fact, to the point that she probably was the only country to adopt a parliamentary resolution in her National Assembly in this respect. We believe that the prospective membership of Turkey in the European Union will further diversify and deepen the Turkish-Bulgarian relations in all fields. In this regard, we value the principled support of Bulgaria for the membership process of Turkey to the European Union. Multidimensional character of the bilateral relationship provides us with plenty of avenues for cooperation to further mutual interest. From the perspective of regional cooperation in the sphere of trade and investment, the relations between Turkey and Bulgaria have flourished immensely during the past couple of years. By 2007, Turkey absorbed nearly 12% of Bulgarian exports alone. In 2012, Turkey was among the first 5 trading partners of Bulgaria. The bilateral trade volume between the two countries maintained a steady course between 2011 and 12, both figures amounting to $2.8 billion. Turkey is the second export market for Bulgarian products after Germany. The main items that we export to Bulgaria are iron and steel, motor vehicles, electric and non-electric machinery and equipment, iron and steel goods, plastics, and plastic goods. The main products of great importance in Turkey's imports from Bulgaria are iron and steel, copper goods, mineral fuels, and mineral oils. The Turkish investments here in this country, including the capital flow via the third parties, amounted to some 1.5 billion euros. Besides the 2 Turkish-owned banks, there are 1,500 active Turkish companies in Bulgaria. Turkish investments spread all over Bulgaria and made important contribution to the Bulgarian economy in terms of creating value added and employment. They cover various fields including glass, banking, hotel business and tourism, textile, chemical, auto electric parts, paper, aluminum, beer chipboard production, sugar, interconnection systems, and ready-to-wear. There are plenty of good examples for Turkish investments in Bulgaria. But since we are in the northern part of the Bulgaria, let me mention some very related to your daily lives. The production plant founded by Shisha Jami in the town of Târgoviște, with a capacity of 200,000 tons of flat glass, glassware, processed glass and mirror, is one of the largest investments made from scratch. The company employs approximately 1,500 people. Alcomet company, established in the city of Shumen, produces aluminum, and most of the company's production is export-oriented. Over 730 people are employed in this company. But we believe that we could do much more together, because I will give you some numbers which would make you understand the Turkish economy or Turkey's economic growth better. The GDP of Turkey in 2012 was close to $800 billion. The growth rate of last 10 years is an average of 5%. The trade volume is very close to $400 billion. The number of foreign companies operating in Turkey as of 2012 is 33,000. So, as you see, I mean, the Bulgaria stands in a very good position vis-à-vis the bilateral trade, but we believe that there are many more things to do on a bilateral basis, because Turkey provides, as a successful economy, very good ground for Bulgarian further trade interactions and investments in this country. We have a population of 76 million, largest youth population compared with within the European Union. Half the population is under the age of 30. We have a qualified and competitive labor force of over 27 million. Each year, 600,000 students graduate from 170 universities in Turkey. More than 700,000 high school graduates, with around half of from vocational and technical high schools. We have a liberal and reformist investment climate. We have a new and highly developed technological infrastructure in transportation, telecommunications, and energy. We are, as Bulgaria does, is centrally located as a natural bridge between east and west and north and south axis. Turkey is also an energy corridor and terminal of Europe within the area of energy reserves. We have low taxes and incentives for businesses. We have a customs union with the European Union since 1996. And we have a large domestic market for anybody, any third country who is willing to come and invest in Turkey. So these are the numbers that I found quite impressive and would like to share with you. And at the end of my presentation, since my time is almost up, I would like to say a few words about the Bulgarian citizens of Turkish origin. Their existence here in this country constitutes an important dimension of bilateral relations. We believe that they contribute to the cultural diversity and economic welfare of the Bulgarian society. They serve as a bridge between the two countries. We would like to see them as equal citizens of Bulgaria, enjoying fully their democratic rights. We believe that Bulgaria has the potential to present a model of cultural coexistence which may set an example for other countries in the region in dealing with the issues of multiculturalism. This concludes my presentation, and in the question and answer section, I would be more than happy to develop on some future perspectives or some future work to do together with Bulgaria and other European partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yurdakul. I would like to invite our second speaker, Mr. Mattias Hьopfner, Head of Diplomatic Mission of Germany in Bulgaria.
And move around so I can see you better. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation, dear Mustafa, and I'm quite honored to be able to participate in this small conference that involves two of Bulgaria's heavyweight partners, and that is Russia and Turkey. And as you all know, Germany maintains very close and very intensive relations to both of these countries. The economic interaction with Russia, between Russia and Germany, is huge, also in the field of energy, by the way. So we just recently finalized the Nord Stream pipeline, which ends in Lubmin, close to Greifswald, crossing the Baltic Sea. And Turkey, Turkey plays a very important role in Germany. A city like Berlin is 30% Turkish, perhaps, or maybe only 20, but citizens with Turkish origin, they do play a very important role in German politics, and I'm personally a big fan of Turkey, this booming economy, and playing more and more important role in the region. Also, I just returned from Turkey from a sailing trip last week, and must say again, I had a very good time in your country. Well, I do have a manuscript. I feel tempted to leave it aside and try to speak more freely. I apologize that this may lead to a less fluent approach, but let me start with a personal remark. I've now finished my 4th year as a foreign diplomat here in Bulgaria, after having extended from 3 years to 4 years, and I'm at the beginning of my 5th year, an additional extension. So, well, why am I extending my term here a second, certainly the last time? That's the maximum. The Foreign Office in Berlin will accept 5 years as the absolute limit, but I asked for a 5th year and they granted it, and I'm very happy about it. Why am I happy about it? Of course, because I like it so much in Bulgaria. Bulgaria is indeed a wonderful country, and what impresses me so much is the cultural density of this country that lies at the crossroads of different cultures, and it makes it extremely interesting, the rich and very long history of your country. But when I talk about cultural density, just the day before yesterday, when the protesters tore down the Berlin Wall in front of our embassy, we had a classical concert inside the embassy with young Bulgarian musicians, and I'm always mesmerized and totally impressed by the level of qualification and the musical feeling they present. We organized this concert to help them finance a master class in Vienna, and we were very successful. The guests were deeply impressed by the extremely high level of musical skills, and were very generous. So, of course, the wonderful sceneries of Bulgaria, and this is not just the lovely Black Sea coast, but also the untouched and very fascinating mountain sceneries, the wonderful climate that you are privileged to have. All this is, all these are elements that made my wife and myself like Bulgaria so much. And there's also another factor. I mean, there are many Bulgarians criticizing their own country for not being so perfect, and also foreigners and sometimes foreign diplomats even join these groups. They criticize Bulgaria for being imperfect in this or that way. There is a charm of not being, or a charm to not being perfect. The mayor of Berlin, governing mayor of Berlin, Mr. Wowereit, he sometimes speaks of his own city as being poor but sexy. And there is something to that. Berlin is economically in some ways weak, but at the same time it attracts so many tourists, and not only young people, but definitely many young people. And a city like Sofia is a bit like that. I mean, you can't directly compare it, but there is a similarity. Sofia is very charming, is not perfect, but this is part of the charm of it. So you don't have to be embarrassed about not being perfect. In some ways, it's also a positive asset. Well, coming to the topic of our the presentation I was asked to give here, German-Bulgarian friendship. Let me start by saying that this friendship is indeed very, very deeply rooted. It was formalized by a German-Bulgarian friendship treaty in the year of 1992. At the time, our foreign minister was Hans-Dietrich Genscher, one of the architects of the Eastern enlargement of the European Union, of the unification of Europe, if you like. By the way, there are only 3 more treaties of that kind, and these are the treaties with Romania, with Hungary, and with the then Soviet Union. So you can see from that Bulgaria always had a high priority in our Southeastern Europe policy. But 1992, this was after the political changes. The roots of our friendship, they go, of course, much deeper, and by deeper I mean they date back much longer. And before I came to Bulgaria, I was certainly not aware how much back they in fact date. They go back to the 9th century. The first friendship treaty between our countries was concluded in the year of 853. I mean, there was no Germany at the time. It was the Franconian Empire, and they agreed on that treaty with Tsar Boris I at the time. Now, this friendship has, particularly in the past decades, translated into a very intensive cultural exchange, and this is reflected particularly, and I find that particularly impressive, in a very high number of here in Bulgaria of German language diploma schools. It's 23 German language diploma schools, where part of the academic schedule is actually taught in German. So German is not just a foreign language, but the kids are taught in German, at least in part. And when they graduate from high school, they can freely enter any German university. They do not need any further language qualification proof. And on top of that, we have in Bulgaria 2 full-fledged Abiturschulen, the German high school graduation schools. One is probably the top school here in Bulgaria, the Galabov school, which has a German branch. And when I hand out the Abiturzeugnisse, the graduation diplomas to these students, well, and I look into their eyes, I'm really impressed, and but not only looking into their eyes, but also looking at their marks, I'm really impressed. This is an excellent school, and I mean, these highly qualified young people, I'll come back to that later, they represent not only the future of our bilateral relations, but I mean, these young people, independent in which language they are trained, they represent the future, of course, of Bulgaria. The fact that so many young Bulgarians go to such schools leads to the fact that young Bulgarians form, well, at least until recently, they were the second largest group of foreign students at German universities after the Chinese, and compare the size of both countries. By the way, Russia also is in a leading role there. Many young Russians have recently come to Germany to study at our universities. And then later, well, some of these graduates from German universities, they go elsewhere or stay in Germany, but many also come back to Bulgaria and contribute to the developments here. And here they are, of course, very interesting for German investors. German investors appreciate it very much when they have highly qualified young people who speak German fluently, but at the same time they are deeply rooted here in Bulgaria, and this is well, comparative advantage, of course. Speaking about German investors and economic, this leads me to the economic relations, and until very recently Germany was, in terms of trade figures, the #1 partner of Bulgaria. We were last year overtaken by Russia, which is I think due to the very high energy trade between your countries. But also in investments, Germany plays a fairly big role. The numbers have gone down. This is due to the crisis and some other factors. I'll briefly touch on that later. But what is important is that German investors, I think, at least in many cases, they play a very positive role in terms of corporate social responsibility. We have a number of German companies who are very engaged in vocational training. They're training young people. And also the Bilateral Chamber of Commerce has discovered this topic of vocational training as a high priority to bring forward the possibilities for German investors. And I must say also, we as an embassy have started to put a strong focus on that, and I'm in a close dialogue with the Bulgarian ministries and talk to Mr. Oresharski about this just very recently. And when we talk about this topic, we try to promote the concept of so-called dual vocational training, where the young trainees, where focus is put on practical training in the respective company, and the vocational training schools only play a secondary role. There's some legislation underway in Bulgaria to put a stronger focus on this concept. In Germany it has proved extremely successful, and it is one of the explanations why Germany has such a low rate of youth unemployment. Here in Bulgaria it's way too high, and something needs to be done. And I hear it from German investors, they need qualified workers, but I also hear it from Bulgarian companies that there's a lack of qualified workforce. There's no lack of engineers and university graduates, but of qualified technicians and trades people. So German business is very active here in Bulgaria. We are also close to the 1,500 companies active here. It's a similar number, a little below that. We have a very active bilateral chamber which has 460 members. It's the biggest bilateral chamber of commerce in Bulgaria. They have made a survey a while ago among their members, and what came out was indicative for some of the problems Bulgaria still continues to have in the area of well, justice and home affairs, which is the topic of the CVM, the Cooperation and Verification Mechanism of the European Union. But also foreign investors, they observe that with a well, very attentive view, and for them it is of very high importance to have a solid, a reliable legal environment when it comes to commercial disputes, that they can hope for predictability and reliability of the law enforcement agencies, and of course this only refers to the area of public procurement, where there are still too many complaints about intransparent, in some cases even corrupt practices. Now this is of course nothing specific only for Bulgaria. We see such phenomena in many countries, including Germany, but the measures taken against such phenomena are still not fully satisfactory, and we hope for progress, but some progress has been achieved, and this is maybe the explanation why we have recently seen some new German investments, but definitely more progress in this area of well, law enforcement, law, legal environment in general needs to be done to attract small and medium-sized companies from not only Germany but also other foreign countries, because they are, of course, when they run into problems, they are particularly vulnerable. If they lose a case, they may lose their business. The big players, they can defend themselves, but the small and medium-sized companies, for them it's more difficult. But at the same time, it's so important to accommodate small and medium-sized companies, because Germany is a good example that they are the innovative force of an economy, that they are the ones to push forward a national economy, and that they are creating jobs and so on. Political relations between Germany and Bulgaria, well, I don't need to mention that there is an abundance of bilateral contacts on all levels, including the highest levels. During my term here, Chancellor Merkel was here, the Bulgarian Prime Minister was in Berlin several times, the State President, Mr. Plevneyev, who's a very special friend of Germany and speaks German fluently. He was in Berlin recently, and I'm not telling any secrets when I say, well, there are pick up the phone type of relations between our governments, even on the highest level. But from today's perspective, bilateral political relations have to be always put into the context of European integration. In 2007, Bulgaria joined the European Union. Germany had at the time the EU presidency, by the way, and this was, as before the accession to NATO, this was a very important step, of course, for Bulgaria, but for all of Europe. And since then, we are observing a process of continuing integration of Bulgaria into the EU structures. In the year of 2007, everyone was aware that certain accession criteria, the so-called Copenhagen criteria, were not fully met. This is true in particular for the area of justice and home affairs, which I already mentioned in the context of the business environment. And that's why this cooperation verification mechanism was introduced, and well, it has been in place now for roughly 6 years, and some progress has indeed been achieved, which is part of these regular progress reports. But at the same time, there are still some benchmarks that have so far not been met, and while the progress is visible, namely in the legislative area, it is the lack of implementation in the daily law enforcement work of the law enforcement agencies of the country that where homework still need to be done, where it's still necessary to catch up. And when I say law enforcement agencies, I of course do not limit this to the courts. This is the police, the National Investigation Office, the prosecutors, the judges, but also other law enforcement institutions like, and very importantly, the Competition Commission. The number of last instance convictions is still, at least when it comes to high-level crime and high-level corruption, in our view, not sufficient, and there lingers the impression of a sometimes selective approach in a law application. Selective in the sense that there are certain vested interest groups that still today seem to manage to intertwine their interests and their power with the political level, and also reaching into the judicial level, and that is an impression that by some observers is characterized as being kind of a state in the state, where you have a democratically elected parliament, a democratically appointed government, but at the same time there are very powerful interest groups working in the background that, and sometimes it's not quite clear who really is in the lead. I mean, to be clear, lobbyism is a phenomenon that we have in all our countries. It's very strong in Germany, and entrepreneurs, of course, they form associations, and the associations are in close touch with the political environment, and everyone tries to, well, to promote their interests. This is a normal phenomenon. It becomes critical when this state in the state phenomenon appears on the horizon, where it becomes a little unclear who is really in charge for certain things, and to which degree the political level is actually influenced. So this is a typical phenomenon of transition periods, and Bulgaria, yes, still is a transition country, but we believe it's moving towards the end of the transition period. We hope that also the media environment will improve in this context. This is one point that I have personally also picked up with some critical remarks recently, because we feel that the, well, namely ownership concentration of namely the print media, but not only the print media, that this should be improved, and that some phenomena deriving from a relatively high level of concentration should be counted. I remind you of the fact that the Reporters Without Frontiers have downgraded Bulgaria quite recently to a fairly rock bottom number of 87. This is no good news within the European Union, and it needs to be addressed, and everyone more or less agrees that it needs to be addressed. These observations come at a time of crisis within the European Union. This is important to mention. Previously there was more patience, more flexibility, perhaps more hope that things would kind of resolve themselves over the years. Now we are facing a fairly serious crisis within the European Union. We are optimistic that it can be resolved, but it's not over yet. And while it is namely an economic crisis, a crisis of indebtedness, one of the lessons learned from the crisis is that it is also, and maybe primarily even, a governance crisis, and therefore the levels of tolerance vis-à-vis weaknesses when it comes to the basic values of the European Union has gone down. Politicians everywhere in the European Union, but certainly in Berlin, they become, well, more and more insistent on the fact that the European Union is not just an economic union, obviously, but a union of certain basic values, and these values need to be adhered to, they need to be lived up to if the European Union shall succeed in the long run. And this is, I mean, because we do see some deficiencies here, and this is not limited to Bulgaria, and it includes some of the founding members of the European Union even. Therefore, the German foreign minister, together with some colleagues, has taken the initiative to found a so-called future group of foreign ministers. Your Bulgarian foreign minister will participate in one of these meetings shortly. And they are discussing ways and means to better promote and also control these values, and there's also been a letter of 4 foreign ministers, among them again the German foreign minister, to Mr. Barroso, stressing that point. The current state of affairs in the European Union is the Article 7 of the Lisbon Treaty being the ultima ratio, but it's more theory than of practical use, because it takes unanimity among all members to really impose any sanctions under Article 7. There's also, of course, the infringement procedures of the European Commission. That's a fairly technical instrument, but we need something in between to defend the Central European values. If we don't address that issue fairly urgently and find solutions soon, we in Germany are afraid that the centrifugal forces that we are starting to see in the European Union, that they would be increased, and that it will be more difficult to control them. And in this general political framework, of course, the topic of Schengen then became more difficult, although Germany had contributed a lot to make sure that Bulgaria is meeting the technical requirements. We had sent experts and also contributed some of the necessary funding, and indeed your Bulgarian border police is state of the art. They are equipped perfectly and are doing an excellent job in our view. But there is this general political context that has slowed down the full Schengen membership. It will come. Well, talking about the European integration, European orientation, I mean, energy is an important topic, and Russia plays a very, very important role, not only here in Bulgaria, but also in Germany.
Welcome.
Yes, the only thing I want to say is that energy security, seen from a European point of view, from today's point of view, includes the necessity of diversification of energy sources. It includes the necessity to improve energy efficiency. So saving energy and having more energy friendly approaches in all aspects. And this of course includes one way or the other also the future of renewable energies. Here in Bulgaria the discussion, well, very often the catchword is Beline. You know, Germany is fading out nuclear power. This is a national decision, and other countries can take different decisions. The only thing we are trying to point out is that any such decision should be made in a very sober, economically minded view. It's a cost calculation, cost-benefit calculation. And when it comes to the cost of a nuclear power plant, you must, of course, not forget the costs of the nuclear waste disposal and also the costs of the decommissioning of a nuclear power plant. You can, at the end of the Nord Stream pipeline in Lubmin, there's a very impressive example of decommissioning of nuclear power plants. They are dismantling these, I think, 6 or 7 reactors piece by piece, and it's really done state in the art. But when you visit it and take a look at it, it becomes quite clear that this is a very expensive venture. So all this needs to be added up, and then you have to put a line under it and see if it's economically viable. This is our recommendation. Let me briefly touch on one aspect of, and I'm already a bit over the time, on one aspect of political relations, and again, political relations, it has left the bilateral context and is part of European relations at this point. I'm talking about civil society, because no modern democracy will be successful without an active and engaged civil society. Civil society has been relatively weak in Bulgaria for historic reasons that are quite understandable. But recently we have seen a fairly significant increase in civil or civic energy and civil society engagement. And when this happened for the first time in February, my colleagues in Berlin asked me some critical questions. They were concerned whether now the austerity policy in Bulgaria, and you know Germany is promoting in principle an austerity policy to maneuver out of the crisis, combined of course with growth, creating policies. But they were a bit concerned that now, as it is the case in other EU countries, the acceptance for the austerity policy would perhaps go down. And also there was a concern that there might be a new thrust for the extreme right and the extreme left in the country. Well, I convinced my colleagues in Berlin that Bulgarians in principle have a general inclination towards budget discipline. They don't spend more than they can afford in general. And but perhaps austerity should be more balanced, should be more put also into a social context. And indeed, your macroeconomic numbers are so fantastic, being way below the 3% budgetary deficit limit, and the indebtedness is way below 20%. So you are among the champions in the European Union with regard to the macroeconomic numbers, and that means that there is indeed some flexibility. At the same time, I mean, this flexibility should be handled carefully, and the austerity approach should not be left, in our view. The civil society engagement that I'm mentioning, it has, of course, also shown some fairly deep frustration in the society, frustration about a perceived lack of justice, about the ostentative wealth of some of the profiteers of the transition period, profiteers that are that continue to search for monopolies to further increase their marge de maneuver, and underestimating perhaps in some cases the importance of market economy type of competition. Only when such a competition is upheld will an economy prosper in the long run. So sometimes looking at this civil society revival, which in essence, in our view, is something very positive, because, as I said initially, without it, a modern democracy will not really be able to function. It's part of the modern democracy to have civil society monitoring, and independent media are an integral part of that as well. But I sometimes also would hope that the forces on the other side, who are defending their benefits that were generated in the transition phase, that they would enter into a kind of pact for Bulgaria. We have seen that in Germany, that entrepreneurs, they joined, although their interests were quite diverse, they entered into a joint venture, into a pact for their country, and this could certainly help to bring things forward. It would require, however, a change of attitude in some ways, and to, well, maybe put it into a short formula. I think it would involve the voluntary end of what Bulgarians sometimes call slobodia. It's it's a special kind of freedom, but a freedom that goes a bit over the top. It's I mean, the approach of anything goes, and as long as I'm not stopped, and this, of course, should be slowed down, and it should be voluntarily slowed down, not necessarily by means of measures by the authorities, because it is in the medium and long-term interest of everyone that slobodia is turned into market economy style freedom. If civil society fails, if such a pact for Bulgaria fails, then yes, then my optimism would be limited for the short term. We would then face problems economically. We would face problems with regard to the stability of the democratic institutions, including the area of justice and home affairs. We would see problems in terms of demography, too many young people would actually leave the country and not come back. So, but to conclude, why am I personally, after having been here 4 years, optimistic? And this brings me back to what I said at the beginning. It's these young people. I tend to call them the Erasmus generation. The young Bulgarians, they are polyglot. They speak English, German, Russian, Turkish. They are cosmopolitan. They're independent in their minds. They are engaged. They are interested in their own country while being open and really not only seeing themselves but living up to be Europeans. And this is something we observe all over Europe. In Germany, when I talk to my daughters, I mean, it's so natural these days that even high school students go for 3 months to France, to England, to the United States, to here and there. And the Erasmus program has widened the scope. Many go to Turkey, to Istanbul, to Russia, so this is what Europe is about, and it doesn't end at the Schengen borders or the external borders of the European Union. It reaches way into the neighboring regions, and this I think, and the topic was the future of our relations. This is the future of our relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoepfner. According to our agenda, we have a lunch break now. It's also working for exchanging opinions and talking. I would like that we start again at 4 p.m. here in this place. Please pass to the next room. There will be the buffet where you can take food.
Специално добре. Да.
My stuff.
Which mistake?
I'm consulate general honorar. This is почетный.
Почетный консул, honorary consul.
Да. We are in consulate. General.
Yes.
General. General. Не honorar.
Okay.
General. Это я.
Consular of the General Consulate.
Ну, consulate general.
Okay.
Это правильно.
Okay. Excuse me.
Нормально.
Okay.
Honorar это совсем другое.
Да. А знам, че вие сте генерален консул.
Нет, I am consular. I am consular. Of consulate general.
Okay.
No general consular.
Разбрах.
No.
Consular of Consulate General.
Да. Это наша...
Окей, така ще ви представя.
Сейчас я тебе покажу. Смотри. Генералному консульству на Русската Федерация Варна. Твое консулат general of the Russian Federation in Varna. Understand?
Yes.
Консулат.
Окей, аз ще ви представя като...
Консула?
Consular of Consulate General. Така.
Окей.
Благодаря ви.
Да, но не хонорар. Это хонорар это вот
господин...
citizen of Bulgaria. This is honorar. Это представитель страны, который... Понимаете, да?
Да.
А консул general представительство страны.
Добре, извинете.
Нормально.